He is indeed the Burger King. Makes you wonder if, all other challenges notwithstanding, his heart will survive the next 3 years of the first term, we hope, and last of his presidency. The new book that he tried to ban has, of course, gone, as most books that they try to ban, right to the top of the bestseller list. Michael Wolff, no mean journalist, former biographer of Rupert Murdoch, spent the best part of a year interviewing the key personnel in and around Donald Trump, and 3 months in the White House and on the campaign trail with the president and all of his inner circle. Donald Trump didn't like the excerpts that began to emerge earlier this week, and how could he? Quite apart from the personal eccentricities and idiocies that the book reveals, like the one I mentioned, a bedtime of 6:30 p.m. with cheeseburgers and Coke and a lock on his bedroom door. No wonder Ivanka, what's his wife's name? Melania. Mustn't get those two mixed up. No wonder Melania is always got such a long face. She's locked out of the marital bedroom, despite the instructions, not advice, of the Secret Service that they may have to get into the president's bedroom in an emergency at any time. Donald has insisted on a lock. Makes you wonder what he's up to in there. But it's certainly not with Melania, because she's in a separate bedroom. But much, much more serious is the picture of deteriorating, putrefying presidency, which is rotten from the head down and is riven by the kind of infighting you thought was fiction in the West Wing and in the House of Cards. If ever a White House was more of a house of cards than this, I cannot imagine what it must have been like. All 100% of the staff that Michael Wolff spoke to, on condition, of course, of anonymity, believed that he not only had not wanted the job, had run for president as a branding exercise to boost his business, and now worries that it may all end up in total ruin, both personal and political and financial, of course, because the damage to Trump's brand is incalculable. 100% of Michael Wolff's sources said not only did he not want the presidency, not only did his wife burst into tears when he won, even though he'd told her he couldn't possibly win, but that same staff members believe that he is absolutely not up to the job. In a way, we kind of knew all of this, but the book nonetheless provides a cascade of supporting evidence that it will be difficult for Trump to avoid any further deterioration in his already slipping political position. So we'll be talking about that with expert witnesses of our own. And just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, he's back. Anthony Lytton Blair, the man from whom nothing should ever have been heard again after the Chilcot inquiry report into his culpability in a war which was out with the law and which has had incalculable consequences. A period of silence for the rest of his life would have been the least that one could have expected. Instead, not only has he piled up £100 million personal fortune, he's never off the television, the radio, and the newspapers. And he's got Jeremy Corbyn in his sights. He was very clear this week, clearer than he has ever been, that Labour's leader will never be forgiven by people like him, whom he describes as the people, if he is continuing his role as, and I quote, a handmaiden of Brexit. What a quaint quaint old phrase to reach for. Jeremy Corbyn, he says, ought to be prepared to sacrifice Labour winning the next election. Yes, that's what he said. Sacrifice Labour winning the next election in order to stop Brexit in the broader national interest. This from a man who launched an illegal war which killed 1 million people and created the earthquake which begat ISIS and the revitalized, multi-hydra-headed monster of Islamist fanaticism, which rages still. So we'll be talking about Mr. Blair. I just got to thinking that all the serial killers in the entire history of the world, between them, together, have not killed more than a mere tiny fraction of the number of people whose deaths Tony Blair is responsible for. You might think that he would have some cheek to be coming out attacking other people. As Piers Morgan put it, pretty well, I thought. Mr. Blair, I met you and you tried to persuade me that Britain must join the euro or face financial disaster. Mr. Blair, I met you and you tried to persuade me that Iraq was bristling with weapons of mass destruction. So when you try to persuade me now that Brexit will be a disaster, there's not enough salt in the world to take a pinch of when listening to you. Good old Piers Morgan, a very powerful way of putting it. Now on the subject of criminals, I have been much occupied today thinking about the truly shocking news that the mass rapist John Warboys, a former taxi driver, systematically, in a fiendishly planned way, raped and sexually assaulted at least 12 women. 12 women. He plied them with drugged drinks in his taxi cab, and then, when they went under the influence of the date rape drug, he came into the back of the cab and brutally raped them. It's impossible for me to understand why such a man should ever be allowed out of prison. But that such a man has been allowed out of prison after serving just 9 years, not even 1 year for every woman that he was convicted of raping and seriously sexually assaulting, but that if you take into account that the police believe that he was responsible for raping and sexually assaulting 100 women, in some newspapers today, 200 women, that would make the period of imprisonment as punishment for rape and severe, serious sexual assault a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, perhaps 4 weeks, for every crime that he may well have committed. And adding insult to injury, it turns out that the victims of this monster, many of them were not even told that he was about to be released, and virtually none of them were asked in advance of the parole board's decision whether they supported this extraordinary act of liberalism. I have no idea who's on the parole board. Vicars and Liberals and Guardian readers, I have no doubt they are. But they exist in a democracy paid for by us. And if Parliament does not demand that they reopen this case and ensure that women are not in the position of being prey to this devilish, fiendish monster, then the Parliament will be making itself even more of an ass than most people think it is today. And lastly, Toby Young. Toby Young, who deleted 50 1,000 of his tweets in one single day this week, when he was announced as a new czar, a university's czar, by the Education Department of Her Majesty's government. The sound of one hand clapping was the title of one of his rather good and funny books, was the sound that we heard when Theresa May's government announced his new appointment. Since then, 160,000 people have signed a petition demanding that this position should be rescinded, that this man who deleted 50,000 tweets in a day because they were a sewer of homophobic, misogynistic, and class-conscious hatred. They were a sewer of hate against working-class boys that go to Oxford, against the state school system, against women, and against anyone that didn't pass muster in his increasingly reactionary look at the world. His father was a substantial Social Democratic peer, chief research officer at the Labour Party for many years. My God, this apple has fallen far from the tree. And the fact that Boris Johnson is his biggest supporter in government and has tweeted remorselessly his support for this obscenely inappropriate appointment maybe tells you all that you need to know.